After 1955's The Quatermass Experiment turned a little-known independent B-movie studio into a formidable force in British film production, Hammer Films executive Michael Carreras, son of studio co-founder James Carreras, was eager to capitalize on the success of its seminal sci-fi horror. After the spiritual sequel X the Unknown finished and the true sequel Quatermass 2 was in production, Carreras knew that it wasn't science fiction that had been the catalyst for financial triumph. Indeed, the studio's earlier efforts in the genre, Four-Sided Triangle and Spaceways, were poor performers with audiences, and for the most part, sci-fi was seen as a uniquely American domain. What made Hammer so successful then had to be horror, a movie genre that had been in steady decline for over a decade, leaving a vacuum for anyone brave enough to fill. Therefore, when Carreras encountered the opportunity to resurrect one of the most famous ungodly creations in all of cinema, he decided that Hammer Films was more than ready to compete with the Universal classics.
We hold in the palms of our hands such secrets that have never been dreamed of.
Baron Victor Frankenstein is about to be put to death for murder. His best defense is an unbelievable story about a macabre science experiment gone much too far, that the murder he has been accused of was actually committed by an undead monster Frankenstein stitched together in his laboratory, right under the nose of his fiancée Elizabeth. With no one to corroborate his bloody tale of corpse reanimation and scientific hubris, Frankenstein is all but certain to have his head removed from his body.
In the mid-50s, fledgling American film producer Max J. Rosenberg approached Associated Artists Productions, or AAP, with a script called Frankenstein and the Monster, written by Milton Subotsky. This potential project was essentially a remake of Universal's Son of Frankenstein, but AAP was disinterested in dealing with the copyright headache or the lack of credentials of Rosenberg and Subotsky, who incidentally would go on to form Hammer rival Amicus Films. AAP was in talks with Hammer at the time, and so Frankenstein and the Monster was passed to Hammer executive Michael Carreras, who liked the idea but not the script, imagining a heavy rewrite to make it into a black and white, low-budget quickie. Meanwhile, Hammer production manager Jimmy Sangster discovered he had the heart of a writer. After Sangster's impromptu script for X the Unknown turned out so well, Michael Carreras gave him a chance to resign his position as production manager and become a full-time writer, offering him a guarantee to buy 3 scripts in 3 years. The first of these scripts was an adaptation of Frankenstein. According to Sangster, he hadn't seen the 1931 Universal version of Frankenstein, nor had he read the Subotsky script, before writing The Curse of Frankenstein, based entirely on Mary Shelley's book, though it's not a particularly faithful adaptation. On the strength of Sangster's script, the project was then passed to producer Anthony Hines, who had higher ambitions for it than Carreras had. The budget was increased to about £65,000, and the film was changed to color, while Hammer stapled Terence Fisher, whose credits for the company included The Last Page, Spaceways, and Murder by Proxy, was chosen as director. Then, on a planned 3-week shoot at Bray Studios, where much of the cast and crew lived during the production, The Curse of Frankenstein started filming in late November of 1956. To play Dr. Frankenstein, Hammer managed to land its first choice in Peter Cushing, arguably the most prestigious actor on British television in those days. The actor had been in films before, but never as the lead, so this was his first chance to really shine on the big screen, even if he didn't exactly love the screenplay. In his autobiography, Cushing relates the time his co-star, Christopher Lee, more on him in a minute, stormed into his dressing room complaining that he didn't have any lines, to which Cushing replied, "You're lucky, I've read the script." Nevertheless, the actor gives it his all, mixing equal parts nuanced, serious performance with heavy layers of ham and cheese.
We must create a human being, a man with perfect physique, with the hands of an artist and with the matured brain of a genius. We can do it, don't you see?
Blending it all so thoroughly that the resulting mix is practically the distilled essence of what would eventually become known as Hammer horror. There is no way to overstate just how essential Peter Cushing is to making this film work, and given that this version of the tale puts far more focus on the Mad Doctor than on his creation, it's fair to say that without Cushing, Hammer horror would never have gotten off the ground. Of course, another key part of that formula is the great Christopher Lee, who was a virtual unknown when he beat out Bernard Bresslaw for the part of the monster. Lee has surprisingly little screen time in the film, and as already mentioned, he doesn't have any lines. Aside from a single scream when he falls into a pit of acid, he doesn't even make much noise. Still, Lee's haunting performance of unbridled rage and confused pathos made him an overnight horror icon, with his brief role as the monster compared favorably to that of Karloff's. Christopher Lee first met Peter Cushing during the making of The Curse of Frankenstein, though they did appear in a couple of the same movies, albeit in separate scenes, and the pair became lifelong friends and the public face of Hammer during its most profitable period. Another future Hammer staple and notable scream queen was Hazel Court, who plays Elizabeth. It was Court who suggested that they hire her own daughter, Sally Walsh, to play the young version of Elizabeth, though the little girl reportedly didn't enjoy the experience. As for Frankenstein's tutor, Paul Krempe, he is played by Robert Urquhart, who also didn't enjoy the experience and never appeared in another Hammer horror, which is a shame, because his performance as the only sane person in the entire movie is grounded and maybe even a little endearing. Other notable actors include Valerie Gaunt as the ill-fated maidservant Justine, the veteran German actor Paul Hartmuth as Professor Bernstein, and the Shakespearean great Andrew Lee, who passed away a month before the film's release, as the Burgomaster. Though the film was only scheduled for a 3-week shoot, it went over by an additional 3 weeks. Luckily, Hammer wasn't the strictest of studios when it came to that sort of thing, so the delays didn't cause much undue stress. However, this stunt went wrong when the stuntman missed his mark, hitting his head not on the pad where it was supposed to, but on the actual ground. Unlike the poor professor, though, he was able to shake it off and continue working. Another problem that almost became catastrophic was the design of the monster, created by makeup artist Phil Leakey. Leakey went to great pains to create a new look for the monster, partially because he wanted this version to stand out, but mostly because Hammer didn't want to get sued by Universal. I can attest that Universal takes its copyright very, very seriously. Multiple makeup tests were done, but neither Leakey nor Terence Fisher were happy with them. It wasn't until the day before filming was set to begin that Leakey decided to throw away all his plans and just put it together on the spot by slapping a bunch of cotton, makeup, and other materials onto Christopher Lee's face. The resulting ad hoc design is the one seen in the final film, and the only wrinkle was that Leakey had to meticulously recreate it every day Lee was in front of the camera. With an X certificate predictably given to it by the British Board of Film Censors, The Curse of Frankenstein released in the UK in May of 1967, to a near-universal uproar from critics, denouncing it as degrading, depressing, and disgusting. This didn't turn away audiences, however, quite the contrary, as it was a huge financial success, both in the UK and in the US, where critics were at least a little more forgiving of its genre excess. All told, it earned somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 million against its budget of roughly $250,000. And it revitalized horror in a big way. It would spawn 5 sequels and 1 pseudo-remake, and began the legacy of Hammer horror we know today. It is as important to the history of horror cinema as the 1931 original is, if not more so, and it has remained a cultural touchstone for generations. I can see why, too. This was very different from the mainstream horror films that came before, not only in its more exploitative sensibilities, but also in its unapologetic nature of giving audiences what they want. Sure, it reinvents the story of Frankenstein not only by focusing almost exclusively on the titular doctor, but also by making him a far less sympathetic figure. This version is a lecherous homicidal sociopath, and I could easily wax poetic about the thematic idea of hubris and obsession removing all semblance of humanity, but at the end of the day, this is one of the most straightforward Frankenstein adaptations out there. I have no doubt it was shocking in its day, but to modern eyes, the ghastly gore, the off-screen murder, and the implied gruesomeness are relatively tame, not showing nearly as much as you think it does. Make no mistakes though, this movie wasn't interested in good taste or critical reception, and it doesn't try to hide its sensationalism. It was the first mainstream picture since the pre-Code era to truly provoke audiences with horror, and that's why it managed to bring the genre back from the brink of cinematic extinction. Truth be told, I friggin' love this movie. The ornate, colorful style of the sets and cinematography perfectly harmonize with the theatrical, melodramatic acting and bombastic soundtrack, and in my book, Peter Cushing is Victor Frankenstein. I will admit the story omits a lot of the more dramatic action of the original book and the 1931 classic. Sangster did this on purpose to be economical, and as such, it doesn't lend itself quite as well to multiple rewatches as some of Hammer's later productions. The pace can feel a little slow after a while. But, that said, Hammer Horror arrived with a bang so big, it carved out an entire section of movie history all its own. Therefore, The Curse of Frankenstein can be nothing less than a horror classic. And that's all for tonight, my dear mortals. What's your favorite Frankenstein movie? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to slam those like and subscribe buttons. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when we'll see what happened when Cushing and Lee reunited for the first time, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.
I can't prove you murdered him, but I can stop you using his brain.
Why, he has no further use for it?